The Ark of the Covenant does not enter history as a legend, nor as an object discovered by chance. It appears abruptly, embedded within a precise ritual framework, described with an intensity reserved for things considered dangerous to approach and impossible to possess. From its first mention, the Ark is treated not as sacred art, but as a volatile intersection between divine will and human limitation. The earliest traditions place its origin during Israel's wilderness period, at a moment defined by instability, fear, and covenant formation. The people are portrayed as newly freed yet unformed, carrying with them memories of Egypt and uncertainties about their God. In this setting, the Ark is introduced not to inspire wonder, but to regulate proximity. It is constructed only after detailed instructions are given, emphasizing dimensions, materials, and procedures with unusual precision. Nothing about its creation is spontaneous. Everything about it is controlled. The Ark is described as a chest of acacia wood, overlaid inside and out with pure gold. Its portability is not incidental. Rings and poles are not decorative features, but safeguards, ensuring that human hands never touch its surface. Above the chest rests the mercy seat, formed from a single piece of gold, flanked by two cherubim whose wings overshadow the space between them. That space is never called empty. It is defined as the locus of divine communication, where the presence of Israel's God is said to meet Moses. In ancient Near Eastern cultures, thrones were not always seats meant for constant occupation. Many were symbolic platforms representing authority rather than hosting it continuously. The Ark aligns with this concept, functioning as a mobile throne pedestal. Yet, unlike surrounding cultures, no image of the deity occupies it. The absence is intentional. The Ark holds no statue, no visible representation. Its power lies in what is not seen. Texts emphasize that the Ark contains testimony, covenant words, rather than cultic images. Law replaces likeness. This distinction marks a radical departure from neighboring religious systems, where divine presence was localized through physical representation. Here, presence is mediated through command and obedience. The Ark does not domesticate the divine. It contains reminders of obligation, not control. The earliest narratives stress separation. Only specific individuals may approach, only at specific times, only through prescribed rituals. The Ark is covered when transported. It remains hidden behind layers of fabric and spatial barriers. Even within the sanctuary, it is enclosed in the innermost chamber, a space defined by restriction rather than access. Silence surrounds it. Scripture offers no description of daily interaction, no depiction of worship directed at the object itself. This controlled distance shapes the psychology of holiness in Israelite thought. Holiness is not beauty alone. It is volatility. The Ark embodies a force that cannot be neutralized by familiarity. Its proximity promises order only if boundaries are respected. When those boundaries collapse, consequences follow swiftly and without negotiation. Early accounts associate the Ark with moments of transition. It precedes the people across the Jordan. It occupies the center of camp during wilderness encampments. It moves ahead of armies, yet its presence does not guarantee victory. These narratives resist reduction into talismanic theology. The Ark does not function as a charm. It amplifies consequences rather than outcomes. One of the earliest and most unsettling episodes occurs when the Ark is brought into battle against the Philistines. Elders assume its presence will secure success. Instead, the defeat is catastrophic. The ark is captured, priests are killed, and the shock reverberates through the community. The narrative does not frame this as divine weakness. It frames it as human presumption. In Philistine territory, the ark brings disorder rather than assimilation. Temples are disrupted, statues fall, communities experience affliction. The object resists integration into foreign religious systems, reinforcing its role as incompatible with casual handling. When returned, it is not celebrated, but approached with fear. Even among Israelites, improper interaction results in death. These episodes establish a pattern. The ark cannot be mastered, transported casually, or repurposed. It does not reward intention alone. It responds to alignment. The divine presence associated with it remains autonomous, unbound by human expectation. Priestly traditions later codify these dangers into law. Detailed regulations govern who may carry the ark, how it must be covered, and when it may be approached. These laws do not soften the earlier narratives. They formalize them. The threat is not diminished by time. It is institutionalized. What emerges from these early accounts is not a treasure narrative, but a boundary narrative. The ark functions as a physical manifestation of limits. It defines how close humanity may come without collapsing under the weight of encounter. Its materials signal value, but its restrictions signal danger. From the beginning, the ark is not meant to be found. It is meant to be approached correctly, or not at all. Its holiness is not passive. It acts, it responds, it resists. This framing sets the stage for everything that follows. The ark's later disappearance will not contradict its nature, it will fulfill it. The form of the ark cannot be separated from the world that produced it. Its proportions, materials, and symbolism emerge from a cultural environment saturated with sacred furniture, ritual chests, and throne platforms. Yet, when examined alongside archaeological parallels from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Levant, the ark stands apart in both purpose and restraint. Portable cultic objects were common across the ancient Near East. Sacred chests carried divine emblems, treaty tablets, or royal insignia. Some were paraded during festivals. Others were placed within temples as footstools for enthroned gods. In this broader context, the ark appears familiar at first glance. A gold-covered chest, rings and poles for transport, guardian figures flanking a sacred space. These elements do not emerge in isolation. The difference lies not in form alone, but in theological intent. Where surrounding cultures filled sacred chests with images or tokens believed to house divine essence, the ark contains covenant testimony. Its power is not generated by material presence, but by relational obligation. This distinction reshapes how authority is understood. The ark does not anchor the divine to place. It marks where command has been given. The cherubim above the ark reflect iconography known from royal thrones throughout the region. Winged creatures frequently appear as guardians of sacred or royal space. In Assyrian palaces, colossal figures flank gateways. In Egyptian temples, divine beings protect the presence of the god. The ark draws on this visual language, yet again subverts it. The cherubim do not face outward in defense. They incline inward, toward the unseen space between them. That space is central. Texts describe it as the point from which divine instruction is issued. The ark is not described as containing presence in the same way a statue would. Instead, presence is associated with encounter. The ark becomes a meeting point rather than a container. This distinction prevents it from becoming an object of manipulation. The materials reinforce this tension. Gold signifies purity, permanence, and value. Acacia wood suggests durability suited for movement rather than monumentality. The ark is designed to endure travel, not to anchor a permanent shrine. Its very construction resists fixation. Even when housed within a sanctuary, it remains structurally prepared to move. Archaeological evidence from early Israelite sites reveals a striking absence of cult statues. Shrines lack images that would normally represent a deity. This absence aligns with the ark's design. Rather than filling sacred space with form, Israelite worship emphasizes restriction and instruction. The ark embodies this theology physically. The concept of divine kingship further clarifies its role. In royal ideology, a throne symbolizes authority whether or not the king is seated. The ark functions similarly. It signals divine rule without confining it. The presence associated with it is not constant in the sense of occupation, but conditional in the sense of covenant fidelity. Texts describing the ark often pair it with movement. It goes before the people. It remains in the center of camp. It enters contested territory. This mobility communicates a theology of guidance rather than containment. The divine presence leads rather than resides. At the same time, access remains severely limited. Only designated priests may approach. Even they do so rarely, and under conditions of ritual purification. The ark's proximity does not democratize holiness. It intensifies hierarchy. Sacred space becomes stratified, with increasing danger as one draws nearer. This structure shapes Israel's understanding of obedience. The ark does not reward curiosity. It does not invite exploration. It demands restraint. Knowledge is mediated, not seized. This posture contrasts sharply with myths from neighboring cultures, where humans acquired divine knowledge through transgression or theft. The ark's role within covenant ceremonies reinforces this ethic. It stands as witness rather than guarantor. Blessing and curse flow not from possession of the object, but from adherence to the terms associated with it. When obedience fails, the ark does not compensate. It exposes. Later, interpretive traditions recognize this function clearly. The ark is remembered not as a magical relic, but as a boundary marker. Its holiness lies in its resistance to use. Attempts to deploy it as an instrument of control repeatedly result in disorder. Even the language surrounding it reflects caution. Descriptions are sparse. Details are limited. The text avoids ornamentation. Silence surrounds the ark more often than explanation. This restraint suggests an awareness that excessive familiarity erodes reverence. The ark's uniqueness, then, is not found in exotic design, but in disciplined absence. It stands at the intersection of known cultural forms and a radically constrained theology. It borrows visual language only to empty it of control. From the beginning, the ark is less an object to be understood than a presence to be respected. Its form teaches restraint. Its symbolism enforces distance. Its existence reshapes how the sacred is imagined. This tension between proximity and prohibition will define every encounter that follows. Narratives surrounding the ark repeatedly undermine the assumption that proximity to the sacred guarantees protection. Instead, they present a more unsettling logic. Holiness intensifies consequence. When alignment exists, order follows. When it does not, disaster unfolds without warning or delay. One of the most revealing moments occurs when the ark is carried into conflict under the assumption that divine presence can be mobilized for victory. Elders invoke memory rather than obedience, recalling past acts of deliverance and assuming continuity without covenant fidelity. The ark is brought into the camp, greeted with celebration, and treated as a corrective to failure rather than a response to repentance. The result is devastating. Defeat follows. The ark is seized. Priestly leadership collapses. The narrative offers no extended explanation, no theological apology. The implication is stark. The sacred cannot be used to compensate for disobedience. Possession without alignment leads not to power, but exposure. This episode reframes the ark's role entirely. It is not a guarantee of divine favor. It is a mirror reflecting the state of covenant relationship. When the people treat it as an object to secure outcomes, it becomes an instrument through which failure is magnified. The ark's capture introduces a critical test. Removed from its ritual context, placed within foreign temples and surrounded by unfamiliar rites, it does not assimilate. Instead, disruption follows. Statues collapse, affliction spreads. The text emphasizes that the disorder is not initiated through ritual invocation. It happens unbidden. The ark does not require activation. This autonomy reinforces a core principle. The presence associated with the ark cannot be localized or repurposed. It is not neutralized by distance. It does not conform to foreign categories. When returned, it is handled with caution rather than triumph. The people do not rush to reclaim it. Fear governs the encounter. One of the most striking features of these accounts is their refusal to glorify Israel. The narratives preserve moments of shame, failure, and loss without mitigation. This literary choice suggests that the ark's power is not subject to national identity. Covenant does not equate to entitlement. Later episodes intensify this message. When individuals approach the ark outside prescribed boundaries, consequences are immediate. The texts describe death not as punishment delivered after deliberation, but as a direct result of boundary violation. Holiness operates like a force. It reacts. These stories are unsettling precisely because they resist moral simplification. The individuals involved are not portrayed as malicious. In some cases, their actions are well-intentioned. They seek to stabilize, protect, or honor. Intention, however, is irrelevant. The boundary remains. This dynamic shapes priestly consciousness profoundly. Regulations governing the ark do not emerge as abstract law. They are responses to lived catastrophe. Coverings, poles, and distance are not ceremonial excess. They are survival mechanisms. The ark's role in these narratives destabilizes common religious instincts. It discourages familiarity. It refuses domestication. It denies access even to those closest to ritual authority unless conditions are precisely met. This is not a theology of intimacy. It is a theology of limits. Importantly, the ark does not speak in these moments. No oracle explains the events. No divine voice offers clarification. Meaning is derived retrospectively through memory and law. Silence itself becomes instructive. This silence contributes to the ark's growing psychological weight. It is not merely feared because of what it does, but because of what it withholds. The absence of explanation forces interpretation inward. Responsibility shifts from object to community. As these traditions develop, the ark becomes less visible in daily religious life. It retreats into the inner sanctuary. Interaction decreases. Ritual access narrows further. The sacred center becomes increasingly silent and inaccessible. This withdrawal does not weaken the ark's significance. It intensifies it. The less it is seen, the more it defines structure. Sacred space organizes itself around absence. The ark's power is measured not by display, but by restriction. By the time centralized worship emerges, the ark functions almost entirely as a fixed point of orientation rather than an active presence. It is acknowledged rather than approached, remembered rather than encountered. This transformation is crucial. It signals a shift from mobile encounter to institutional memory. The ark no longer leads, it anchors. Its power becomes symbolic as much as immediate. Yet, the underlying danger does not disappear. Laws continue to emphasize boundaries. Stories continue to circulate about improper contact. The ark remains potent even in stillness. Through these accounts, a consistent logic emerges. The ark does not protect against failure. It exposes it. It does not reward proximity. It enforces distance. It does not invite control. It resists it. This logic will shape the ark's fate more than any invading army. As Israel's worship becomes centralized, the ark's movement slows and its silence deepens. What was once carried at the front of a wandering people is now enclosed within architecture designed to restrict access, regulate ritual, and formalize distance. The ark does not disappear at this stage. It becomes still. The construction of a permanent sanctuary reshapes the meaning of sacred space. The ark is placed within the innermost chamber, a room defined less by what occurs there than by what is forbidden. No light source is described. No furnishings accompany it. The space is approached only under extreme limitation, reinforcing the idea that presence is not meant to be observed. This spatial arrangement reflects a graded theology. Holiness intensifies as one moves inward. Outer courts accommodate activity and sound. Inner areas require silence and purification. At the center rests the ark, hidden behind barriers that are both physical and symbolic. The veil is not decoration, it is defense. Priestly texts emphasize that approach is rare, regulated, and dangerous. Even the high priest enters only at appointed times, following prescribed rites. The ark itself is never handled directly. It remains covered, concealed, and largely unseen. Its presence is acknowledged through absence. This controlled concealment alters how the ark functions within religious consciousness. It no longer intervenes visibly in events. It no longer travels with the people. Instead, it becomes the immovable axis around which worship is organized. Power is no longer demonstrated. It is assumed. Ritual memory replaces encounter. The ark's significance is preserved through instruction rather than experience. Stories of its earlier movements circulate as cautionary accounts. Law codifies what narrative once illustrated. The danger remains, but it is now managed through distance. This transition coincides with broader developments in Israelite religion. Prophetic voices increasingly emphasize obedience over ritual presence. The ark, once central to physical movement, recedes as moral alignment takes precedence. The sacred is no longer tied to an object in motion, but to fidelity in conduct. Yet, the ark's invisibility does not diminish its symbolic weight. On the contrary, concealment heightens its authority. What cannot be seen cannot be tested. What cannot be approached cannot be trivialized. The ark becomes the silent measure against which all worship is evaluated. Historical records from the period offer limited detail about the ark's day-to-day status. This absence is telling. The texts do not indulge curiosity. They do not describe maintenance, inspection, or display. Silence becomes part of the tradition. Later, interpretive sources reflect this restraint. The ark is remembered as the focal point of divine presence, but rarely described. Its power lies in what it signifies, rather than what it does. Memory becomes ritualized. Absence becomes intentional. This intentional absence prepares the ground for what follows. When the sanctuary is threatened, when political collapse looms, the ark's silence becomes ominous. It does not intervene. It does not speak. It does not save. The destruction of the sanctuary marks a turning point. Structures are dismantled. Sacred space is violated. Yet the texts remain curiously restrained about the ark itself. There is no dramatic account of its seizure. No enemy triumph is recorded. The object that once drew attention through danger now vanishes into silence. This omission has provoked centuries of speculation, yet, within the logic of the tradition, it is consistent. The ark was never meant to be an object of spectacle. Its removal, concealment, or loss is not framed as defeat. It is framed as absence. Some traditions suggest that the ark was hidden before the destruction, removed by priests who understood the danger of exposure. Others imply divine action, a withdrawal of presence in response to covenant failure. What unites these interpretations is restraint. The ark does not fall into enemy hands within the text's imagination. This silence functions theologically. It denies conquerors a trophy. It denies readers closure. The ark exits history not with drama, but with disappearance. Its absence becomes a statement. The sacred center of Israelite worship is no longer accessible, not because it has been destroyed, but because it has been removed from reach. The boundary has shifted permanently. In this way, the ark fulfills its role. It was never meant to be grasped. When grasping becomes inevitable, it withdraws. The stage is now set for traditions that interpret this disappearance not as loss, but as protection. The silence that surrounds the ark's disappearance leads to an intriguing theological shift. It is not simply lost. It is concealed. Some texts suggest that this concealment was intentional, a divine strategy to preserve what remained of Israel's covenantal identity. The ark, which once led armies and defined ritual, now retreats into obscurity. Its absence becomes a crucial part of the narrative, a theological withdrawal that speaks louder than any victory. In these traditions, the ark is not simply hidden because of destruction or looting, but because its presence has become too dangerous for a people whose covenantal faith is in decline. The people of Israel, having broken their pact with God, are no longer worthy of such direct proximity to the divine. The ark is removed not as an object of defeat, but as a measure of divine judgment. Its very concealment becomes a marker of failure. The prophet Jeremiah, whose warnings permeate the final days of the First Temple, offers a glimpse into this theology of absence. His writings suggest that the ark, once a symbol of divine presence, will no longer be remembered. In the coming age, the people will no longer need it. At that time, he writes, they will no longer say, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. The ark will be forgotten, not because it is lost, but because a new relationship with God will be formed, one not based on objects or rituals, but on personal righteousness and internal transformation. This idea of forgetting is not mere neglect. It is a deliberate theological act. The ark is removed because it is no longer the vehicle of divine communication. It is no longer necessary for the new generation of Israelites. This is a radical departure from earlier traditions that saw the ark as the direct link between the people and their God. Now, its disappearance signifies a new phase in Israel's spiritual journey, one that emphasizes the inward over the external. The idea that the ark's removal was an act of divine mercy or protection is explored in various apocryphal texts. The Sec Maccabees, for instance, recounts how the ark was hidden by the prophet Jeremiah in a cave on Mount Nebo before the Babylonian invasion. According to this tradition, Jeremiah, understanding the inevitability of the coming destruction, chose to conceal the ark rather than allow it to fall into foreign hands. The narrative presents this act not as a loss, but as a protective measure. The ark, in this context, is not taken, but hidden, safeguarded by God until a time of renewal. This notion of protection rather than loss deepens the mystery surrounding the ark's fate. If it was hidden by divine command, then its eventual reappearance would not be a restoration of what was lost, but a fulfillment of prophecy. It would mark the end of one era and the beginning of another, an era in which the ark would no longer be needed as a symbol of divine presence. In this sense, its disappearance serves as a form of divine judgment, a statement about Israel's spiritual state. Yet, the silence surrounding the ark does not end with these apocryphal stories. Even in later rabbinic traditions, there are glimpses of its continued importance. The Talmud speaks of the ark in future terms, suggesting that its return would be a sign of the coming Messiah. In these traditions, the ark is not merely an object of historical interest. It becomes a symbol of hope for redemption, a prophetic object that stands in the background of Jewish eschatology. The ark's absence thus becomes woven into Israel's collective imagination. It is no longer just a physical object, but a potent symbol of what Israel lost and what it hopes to regain. In this sense, its concealment is not a final act of disappearance, but a prelude to something greater. The ark's story is unfinished, and it remains an open question in both history and theology. Meanwhile, the physical world moves on. The second temple is built, and worship shifts from a mobile tabernacle to a more fixed structure. Yet, in the hearts and minds of the people, the ark is never forgotten. The absence of the ark in the second temple is remarked upon by historians like Josephus, who notes that it was never present in the Holy of Holies. The temple, though grand, was missing the central object that had once defined its sacredness. This absence becomes a reminder of the fall and the loss of direct access to God's presence. The people of Israel, now living under foreign dominion, do not seek the ark with the same urgency as they did in the past. Instead, they turn to the study of Scripture, prayer, and moral living as means of connection with the divine. The concept of God's presence shifts. It is no longer embodied in an object that can be touched and carried. It is now found in obedience, in the heart, and in the community. Yet, the idea that the ark may one day return never fully disappears. For many, it remains an enduring symbol of God's covenant with Israel, a covenant that, though broken, has not been abandoned. The ark's absence is not the end of the story, but a moment suspended in time. It is the silence before the next chapter of divine history is written. The final chapter of the ark's journey may never be fully told. Whether it will ever be found, or whether it will remain forever hidden, is a question that may never be answered. But the Ark's legacy, woven into the fabric of Israel's history and imagination, continues to echo through the ages. It represents the tension between presence and absence, between what is seen and what is hidden. It is a symbol of both loss and hope, of a divine relationship that cannot be fully contained in any object, but must be experienced, however fleetingly, in every moment of history. As generations pass, the Ark shifts from lived reality into remembered boundary. What once defined movement, danger, and proximity now defines absence, restraint, and expectation. This transition does not weaken its authority, it reframes it. In the period following the exile, religious life reorganizes itself without the Ark at its center. The most sacred space remains, but it is empty. The inner chamber still exists, still restricted, still approached with ritual gravity, yet the object that once justified that danger is no longer present. This emptiness is not treated as a temporary inconvenience. It becomes normative. Second Temple worship adapts to this reality with remarkable discipline. There is no attempt to replace the Ark. No replica is constructed. No symbolic substitute is installed. The space remains deliberately unoccupied. This decision is theologically significant. It signals that what was withdrawn cannot be recreated by human initiative. Texts from this period reflect an awareness that something irretrievable has occurred. Holiness is no longer concentrated in an object, but distributed through law, memory, and practice. Study replaces encounter. Prayer replaces proximity. The sacred migrates from space to time, from object to discipline. This shift aligns with broader developments in Jewish thought. The divine presence is no longer expected to reside between cherubim of gold. It is encountered through obedience, communal life, and ethical responsibility. The Ark becomes a memory that disciplines expectation. It teaches that direct access is neither permanent nor guaranteed. Importantly, this absence is never resolved through discovery narratives. There is no canonical account of a recovered Ark, no triumphant return. The tradition resists closure. Instead, it preserves uncertainty as a theological stance. What was once restricted is now unreachable. This restraint contrasts sharply with later popular imagination. The idea of the Ark as a lost artifact awaiting rediscovery belongs largely to much later speculation. Ancient sources do not encourage a search. They encourage reverence for absence. The Ark's power lies precisely in the fact that it is no longer available. Rabbinic reflection deepens this interpretation. Discussions focus not on location, but on meaning. The Ark becomes associated with an era of directness that is no longer appropriate. Its concealment is understood as mercy, preventing misuse and misunderstanding. The sacred is protected by distance. Some traditions suggest that the Ark will only reappear in an age fundamentally different from the present one. Its return is tied not to human effort, but to divine initiative. Until then, its absence functions as a safeguard. It prevents the illusion that holiness can be recovered through excavation or conquest. This perspective reframes the question of why the Ark cannot be found. It is not because it is well hidden. It is because it is no longer meant to be approached. The barrier is not geographical, it is theological. Archaeology, for all its achievements, reflects this limitation. Despite extensive excavation in Jerusalem and surrounding regions, no credible trace of the Ark has been uncovered. This absence is not surprising within the framework of the tradition. The Ark was never intended to leave recoverable remains. Its value was never material alone. The materials from which it was constructed, though precious, were secondary to function. Once the function ceased, the object ceased to matter in the same way. The tradition does not lament the loss of gold or craftsmanship. It reflects on the loss of immediacy. This absence also reshapes political theology. Without the Ark, no ruler can claim direct divine endorsement through possession. Authority becomes decentralized. Power must justify itself through law and wisdom rather than proximity to an object. The disappearance of the Ark undermines sacral kingship. In this sense, the Ark's removal prevents future abuses. It cannot be paraded to legitimize conquest. It cannot be displayed to inspire fear. It cannot be used to silence dissent. Its absence protects the community from confusing symbol with source. Later, mystical traditions preserve the Ark as an idea rather than an object. It becomes associated with hidden realms, inaccessible knowledge, and restrained revelation. These interpretations do not contradict earlier texts. They extend the logic of concealment. The Ark's story thus evolves without resolution. It is not a puzzle awaiting solution, but a boundary that continues to function. Its absence teaches that not everything sacred is meant to be retrieved. Some things are withdrawn precisely to preserve their meaning. The longing that remains is not for an artifact, but for restored alignment. The Ark becomes a measure of distance between human condition and divine proximity. As long as that distance remains, the Ark remains hidden. In this way, the Ark continues to shape religious consciousness long after it vanishes from sight. It governs expectation through silence. It teaches restraint through absence. It endures not as an object, but as a limit. And that limit will define every later attempt to explain, recover, or imagine it. Beyond canonical texts, the Ark persists within a network of interpretive traditions that treat its concealment as purposeful and its recovery as conditional. These sources do not frame the Ark as misplaced property. They frame it as withheld presence. Second Temple literature expands this idea carefully. The Ark is associated with a time when divine communication was immediate and dangerous, a period no longer suited to a fractured community. Its absence is interpreted not as abandonment, but as a recalibration of how the sacred engages the world. What once confronted directly must now be approached indirectly. Texts such as 2nd Esdras reflect a worldview shaped by loss, exile, and deferred fulfillment. In this framework, sacred objects disappear because the conditions that sustain them have collapsed. Restoration is possible, but only alongside cosmic renewal. The Ark does not return to stabilize the present. It belongs to a transformed future. This eschatological framing is crucial. The Ark is not expected to resurface through human discovery. Its return is imagined only in conjunction with divine action that restructures history itself. Until that moment, concealment is protection. The boundary remains intact. Early Christian writers inherit this logic, though they redirect its meaning. The Ark becomes a symbol of fulfilled covenant rather than suspended presence. Its absence is no longer a problem to be solved, but evidence that divine dwelling has shifted. What was once localized has become universalized. The sacred no longer rests behind a veil. Yet, even in these interpretations, the Ark is not treated lightly. It is not dismissed as obsolete. It is honored as a necessary stage in the development of sacred understanding. Its danger is acknowledged. Its withdrawal is respected. Importantly, no ancient tradition presents the Ark as an object to be recovered for power or proof. That impulse emerges much later, disconnected from the theological frameworks that originally surrounded it. In early sources, curiosity about its location is subordinate to concern about worthiness. This restraint explains the absence of detailed concealment narratives. When traditions speak of hiding the Ark, they do so without maps, measurements, or directions. The concealment is not logistical, it is absolute. Knowledge itself is withheld. This pattern mirrors broader ancient conceptions of forbidden knowledge. Certain things are hidden not because they are lost, but because they are not meant to be accessed prematurely. The Ark joins this category. It becomes an object that teaches through inaccessibility. As centuries pass, speculation grows in popular imagination, but the textual tradition remains disciplined. Silence is preserved. The Ark does not resurface in times of crisis. It does not reappear to validate movements or leaders. Its absence resists exploitation. This resistance is itself instructive. The Ark's power is inseparable from restraint. When restraint collapses, presence withdraws. This principle governs not only the Ark's fate, but the entire logic of sacred engagement within these traditions. The Ark thus becomes a negative space within history. It shapes thought by not being there. It reminds communities that divine presence is not subject to demand, discovery, or proof. It appears only under conditions not of human choosing. In this sense, the Ark's disappearance is not an unresolved problem. It is the resolution of a problem that preceded it. It prevents the sacred from being reduced to artifact. It preserves transcendence by refusing availability. Every later attempt to imagine its location reflects a shift away from this original discipline. The ancient texts themselves offer no encouragement for search. They offer warning, memory, and hope deferred. The Ark remains hidden not because it is buried deeply enough, but because it belongs to a mode of encounter no longer accessible. Until that mode returns, the Ark remains where it has always been meant to be, out of reach. Despite the disciplined silence of ancient sources, the Ark gradually becomes a magnet for speculation as historical distance grows. This speculation does not arise from the texts themselves, but from the human discomfort with unresolved absence. When boundaries persist too long, imagination begins to press against them. Claims emerge in various regions, often tied to national identity, religious legitimacy, or political aspiration. The Ark is said to rest beneath mountains, within forgotten chambers, or beyond guarded thresholds. Yet, these claims share a common feature. They are unsupported by early tradition and detached from the theological logic that governed the Ark's withdrawal. Archaeology repeatedly confronts these narratives with absence. Excavations in Jerusalem reveal layers of destruction, rebuilding, and ritual adaptation, but no trace of the object once believed to define the city's sacred center. This absence is not anomalous. It is consistent with the tradition's insistence that the Ark was removed from the cycle of history before destruction rendered recovery possible. Scholars note that the Ark's materials would not survive unnoticed if left exposed or reused. Gold is rarely abandoned. Sacred objects are rarely forgotten. The lack of physical evidence suggests deliberate removal rather than accidental loss. The Ark did not vanish into rubble. It exited through intention. This intention aligns with a broader pattern in ancient religious thought. Objects associated with dangerous holiness are often withdrawn when their function becomes incompatible with communal stability. Rather than allowing misuse, they are removed from circulation. The Ark follows this pattern precisely. Later legends, while vivid, reveal more about the communities that produce them than about the Ark itself. They express longing for certainty, for tangible connection, for restored immediacy. Yet, they also betray a shift in understanding. The Ark is recast as a prize rather than a boundary, a solution rather than a warning. Ancient tradition resists this redefinition. The Ark was never presented as something to be sought. It was something to be approached only under conditions that no longer exist. Its power depended on a framework of obedience, ritual order, and communal alignment that collapsed long before speculation began. Even if the Ark were physically intact somewhere, its discovery would not restore its function. The conditions that made it meaningful are absent. The priesthood that served it no longer operates in its ancient form. The sanctuary that housed it no longer stands. The ritual economy that sustained it has ended. This reality renders the question of location secondary. The Ark's meaning cannot be excavated. It cannot be activated. It cannot be reintegrated into modern religious life without distorting its purpose. Any attempt to do so would repeat the errors preserved in the earliest narratives. The Ark's power was never inherent in its materials. It was relational. It existed within a network of obligations, boundaries, and shared memory. Remove it from that network, and what remains is an object stripped of context and danger alike. This understanding reframes the popular question of why no one may find the Ark. The prohibition is not enforced through secrecy alone. It is enforced through irrelevance. The Ark cannot be found because it no longer functions as something that can be found. Its disappearance is not a gap awaiting resolution. It is a conclusion. The tradition does not anticipate recovery through effort or discovery. It anticipates transformation through alignment. In this way, the Ark's absence continues to teach. It confronts the impulse to reduce the sacred to artifact. It resists the desire for proof over practice. It reminds that divine presence is not secured by possession, but by posture. The Ark remains present precisely by not being present. Its silence governs expectation. Its absence preserves meaning. And so, it stays beyond reach, not because it is hidden too well, but because it belongs to a sacred economy that no longer operates within history as it is now known. Within scholarly discourse, the Ark increasingly functions as a case study in how sacred objects transition from lived reality into theological symbol without losing authority. Its disappearance does not diminish its role. It clarifies it. The Ark becomes a reference point for limits rather than a focus of expectation. Historians note that the biblical record preserves many sacred objects in detail, even after their destruction or loss. The bronze altar, temple furnishings, priestly garments, and vessels are described, catalogued, and mourned. The Ark alone exits the narrative without inventory, lament, or recovery effort. This distinction is deliberate. The tradition refuses to treat it as replaceable or recoverable. This refusal reshapes later religious imagination. The Ark's absence prevents nostalgia from becoming idolatry. It blocks the desire to return to a former mode of access that was never meant to be permanent. The past is remembered, but not reinstated. Theological reflection increasingly understands the Ark as belonging to a category of sacred reality that withdraws when misaligned with human condition. In this view, the Ark is not stolen by enemies nor lost to time. It is withheld because its presence would no longer produce order. What once stabilized now destabilizes. This logic explains why the Ark never reappears during later crises. Foreign domination, persecution, and religious reform all occur without its return. The absence is consistent. The sacred does not intervene by restoring former instruments. It demands adaptation. From this perspective, the Ark's disappearance protects both the divine and the community. It prevents the illusion that holiness can be compelled. It ensures that reverence does not collapse into spectacle. It preserves the distinction between memory and possession. The Ark's legacy thus survives, not in wood and gold, but in structure. Sacred space remains ordered even when empty. Ritual continues even without central object. Authority persists without physical validation. These developments would not have been possible had the Ark remained accessible. Modern efforts to locate the Ark often overlook this internal logic. They treat absence as a problem to be solved rather than a condition to be understood. Yet, within the tradition itself, absence is the solution. It enforces humility, where certainty would distort meaning. Scholars also emphasize that the Ark's role was never universal. It belonged to a specific covenantal moment, a particular ritual system, and a defined community. To remove it from that context is to misunderstand its nature entirely. The Ark was powerful precisely because it was limited. This limitation explains why the tradition never democratized access to it. Even at the height of its presence, most people never saw it. Its influence was structural, not experiential. Its disappearance simply extends that principle. In this sense, the Ark remains active. It continues to shape how the sacred is approached by teaching restraint through memory. It establishes a pattern in which withdrawal is not abandonment, but discipline. The enduring fascination with the Ark reveals more about human desire than about divine intent. The longing to find it reflects a wish for certainty, immediacy, and control. The tradition answers that longing with silence. That silence is not empty, it is formative. It teaches that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed, even in the name of devotion. The Ark stands as the clearest example of this principle within biblical tradition. As history moves forward, the Ark recedes further into theological background, yet its function remains intact. It continues to define what cannot be taken, handled, or displayed. It remains a warning against confusing access with alignment. The final word of the tradition is not anticipation, but acceptance. The Ark does not wait to be found. It waits for conditions that may never return, and in that waiting, it fulfills its purpose completely. The Ark of the Covenant endures not as a missing object, but as a completed statement. Its story does not end in discovery, triumph, or recovery. It ends in withdrawal, and that withdrawal is the message. From its first appearance, the Ark defined limits. It taught that proximity to the sacred is not a right, not a reward, and not a guarantee. It is conditional, dangerous, and rare. Every narrative involving the Ark reinforces this logic. When boundaries are honored, order emerges. When they are violated, consequence follows without exception. Its disappearance follows the same pattern. When the structures that sustained restraint collapse, the Ark does not adapt. It departs. The tradition refuses to dramatize this departure because drama would invite possession, and possession was never the point. Silence preserves meaning better than spectacle. The ark's absence reshapes religious consciousness permanently. It forces a shift away from objects toward responsibility, away from proximity toward alignment. The sacred is no longer encountered through guarded furniture in a hidden room, but through obedience, memory, and communal discipline. This transformation is not framed as loss alone. It is framed as necessity. The question of where the ark is becomes secondary to why it is not here. Ancient tradition answers that question consistently. The ark cannot be found because it no longer belongs to a world in which it could function rightly. Its presence, without the covenantal framework that governed it, would not restore holiness. It would distort it. This is why no authorized search exists in early sources. No priest is commanded to retrieve it. No prophet promises its recovery through human effort. When the ark is spoken of in future terms, its return is bound to transformation beyond history as it is known. Until then, concealment is preservation. The ark thus stands as a boundary against misuse of the sacred. It prevents the collapse of transcendence into artifact. It denies the impulse to control, display, or weaponize divine presence. By remaining hidden, it protects what it represents. Modern fascination with the ark often reverses this logic. It imagines discovery as validation and recovery as triumph. Ancient tradition offers a more sobering conclusion. Some things are withdrawn not because they are lost, but because they have fulfilled their role. The ark taught a people how to live near what they could not command. When that lesson could no longer be sustained, the teacher departed. Nothing in the tradition suggests that this departure was a failure. It was the final act of consistency. The ark did exactly what it was always meant to do. It established a limit, enforced it, and then removed itself so that the limit would remain intact. That is why no one may find it. Not because it is hidden too deeply, guarded too fiercely, or buried too well, but because it was never meant to be found again.